Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ed Steinfeld. I'm the director of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. It's great to see you all. Some old friends, some new friends. Some of you have come from very far away, some from very near, but I'm so delighted to see all of you and to welcome you to the beginning of our conference on cities, citizenship, and governance. Many of the issues we'll be talking about are not new. Issues about how citizens access or don't access rights, how citizens access or don't quite access services and goods, how citizens access or can't access certain kinds of spaces. They're not new issues. However, I'd argue, and I think many of us, and I've learned from many of the papers you've written, that the issues have new and tremendous urgency, partly because of the rates of urbanization in many parts of the world, partly due to challenges like climate change and what that's doing to urban spaces, partly due to challenges surrounding displacement for a variety of reasons, the movement of people, and partly due to the nature of our times, ethno-nationalism and populism. All of these things and many more make the issues that we'll be talking about in the conference, I would argue, more urgent than ever. But there's just one other point I want to raise. This conference represents an effort on the Watson Institute's part to work deeply with a series of global partners and to develop real partnerships of equality, and partnerships where we primarily are learning from you all over, we hope, extended periods of time, and periods of time that'll involve empirical research and theorizing, and perhaps most important, truly comparative research. Truly comparative and truly globally comparative research. I'm really excited and optimistic about this endeavor. I especially want to thank Susan Moffett and Patrick Heller and Dan Smith for really taking the lead on this effort. I'll have other chances to speak later on, but again, I want to welcome you all and turn it over to Susan Moffett. Thanks.
So welcome, everyone, and welcome to our conversation on the state from below, urban citizenship in policed communities, with Eshel Weaver, who is the Bloomberg Distinguished Associate Professor of Political Science and Sociology at Johns Hopkins University. We're so glad to have Professor Weaver join us for our conversation on, our interdisciplinary conversation on cities, citizenship, and governance in the 21st century. A conversation that will span global spaces, a conversation that will span perspectives on the structures and institutions and political processes through which cities incorporate and exclude citizens and aspiring citizens. A conversation that we hope will ultimately wrestle with the question of where do we go from here as a community of scholars and practitioners working in this important and evolving and contested space. So this is a conversation that began organically across the centers, initiatives, and programs here at the Watson Institute. And we found that cities, citizenship, and governance raises common questions across our centers and common commitments. And we seek to build on that common foundation, but yet advance research and practice and policy at the intersection by building on and leveraging our different perspectives. And so we're delighted to have Professor Weaver and all of you join us for the launching of that conversation today. So Professor Weaver's work focuses primarily on the US context, but speaks broadly to important issues of cities, citizenship, and governance. Her expertise and her scholarship has made significant contributions to ongoing debates over the persistence of racial inequality and the consequences of economic polarization. Some of her scholarship has demonstrated how punishment and surveillance have been core components of American citizenship in the modern era, how they have contributed to the expansion of the U.S. state, how they form some of the primary means through which mostly disadvantaged citizens come into contact and interact with government. And she also demonstrates how they work as a vehicle, for a political vehicle for making an end run around civil rights advances. Among her many awards and honors, her book Arresting Citizenship, co-authored with Amy Lerman, was awarded the Dennis Judd Best Book on Urban Politics Award. Her book A New Racial Order, co-authored with Jennifer Hochschild and Tracy Birch, was named a Choice Outstanding Academic Title for 2012. She has been a fellow with the Andrew Carnegie Foundation and also a presidential fellow with the Russell Sage Foundation. And Professor Weaver not only engages in important research, but she embeds her research in communities of practice. And to that end, she has served on the Harvard University and National Institute of Justice's executive session on community corrections, the American Political Science Association's Presidential Task Force on Racial Inequality in the Americas, and the Center for Community Change's Good Jobs for All initiative. We're delighted to have her here to talk with us about some of her current research that uses the Portals project that draws on over 800 conversations among individuals on policing in highly policed communities and what that tells us about democracy and citizenship. So our time together will unfold in the following way. Professor Weaver will begin with about 45 minutes of conversation with us, and then I'll launch with a few questions when she finishes, and then we will open up the floor to your questions. We very much look forward to your questions, and then we'll continue the conversation out in the main foyer of the Watson Institute. Just a reminder, our conversation today will be recorded, and that includes the question and answer period. Now, will you please join me in very warmly welcoming Professor Eshel Weaver.
It's wonderful to be here, and thank you to Susan Moffett for organizing this, and to Ed and everyone at the Watson Institute for bringing me back. I first gave a little snippet of what I will present to you today about a year ago in I think upstairs, and it's come some ways since then. So thank you for being here. And for helping me start this research journey. Thank you also to Sam Griffin, who really navigated the logistics of setting all of this up. From my late night email last night when I was in urgent care thinking that I had a stomach bug, I'm fine. It was some food poisoning. But thank you to her for putting all of this into motion. In Newark, New Jersey, a young American testified to a perfect stranger. He gripped a paper bag in one hand with 6 large numbers on it, and that bag contained the items that he had on him as his government put him into a cell at the Essex County Jail. He was on his way home that day when he said, "We're being locked up and held at a ransom." I call that a ransom, not a bail, because this is a system that's created for the rich to get richer. You understand what I'm saying? We're not the rich. I feel as though that system is created. Why? To generate more money for commissaries, for my family to spend more money on commissary food, and other families, for other inmates who are in there. I have a 4-year-old son. I don't wish to spend my money on commissaries. I don't wish to pay lawyers' fees and court fees and ponds and things like that. No, I want to give this money to my son. You know, the summertime is coming, and my son loves nature. So you know what I thought about while I was in that cell was doing more things that involve nature with him. Taking him to the zoo, taking him to the park, taking him to the beach. That's where I wish to put my money at, not back into this injustice system. 909 miles away in a park in Milwaukee stood another man 20 years his senior. But distance was no matter. That man stood right in front of him with the illusion of being in the same room, connected by a digital wormhole. He responded with assurance. "Yo, your voice is supported, bro," and explained his wish that prosecutors walk a day in their shoes, since they don't know what it's like to live on the other side, and they in charge of our fate. While he was a stranger, he was not unknown to the young man. They each stood inside a chamber like this that we had repurposed from a container meant to ship goods to a container of ideas, meant to ship our thoughts, meant to collaborate and connect us and constellate among one another. Not unlike the young man's cell in the county jail, the space inside was small and contained, but instead of isolation from others, this dark room was designed to connect and amplify the testimony of America's fourth largest city, wards of the state. We call it a portal. After the pair of men left the box that day, a young woman entered. She spoke to a mother, this time in Chicago. And over the course of the next year and a half, 2,000 others exchanged stories, homespun lyrics, bore witness to one another, and shared freedom dreams inside these virtual chambers. My colleague Tracy Mears at Yale Law School, Gwen Prouse, our doctoral student, and I paired up with artist and tech entrepreneur Amar Bakshi, who had first designed this gold experiment in his backyard, to locate portals in 11 neighborhoods in 5 cities across the United States and 1 in Mexico City. Our collaboration springs from a novel partnering of a new technological and public infrastructure with research. We sensed the power of this combination to transform both what we know and how we go about knowing it. With the help of curators, we amassed a rich archive of narrative experiences between people who would not otherwise encounter one another. Their testimonies come during a time when scholars bemoaned the decline of public things, the erosion of civic life, the emergence of civic deserts. When footage of black men being felled by police, like in my city, Baltimore, where Freddie Gray's spinal cord was severed from a rough ride in a police van, that set off a black spring that swept the United States and ignited black and brown communities to rehearse their ancestors' pleas to say her name, Black Lives Matter, and no justice, no peace. When municipalities like Ferguson were engaged in predatory wealth extraction, generating enough money from fines and fees to support 1/5 of the municipal budget. How do people, like the young person in Newark and his older interlocutor, experience government? How is the power of state agents resisted or deployed? How do most characterize both the nature of their citizenship and the logic of the state? What discourses and ideologies do they draw on to make sense of their interactions with street-level bureaucrats? And do they redefine and contest and reframe mainstream conceptions of American democracy? And how do they imagine liberation? We don't know. I come to you from a field that studies state power, citizenship, governance, and democracy, and we had surprisingly few theories and concepts to help us answer these questions. From a field framed by images of representative democracy and T.H. Marshall's conception of citizenship, where debates about what drives people's preferences and interests dominate, taking non-domination by the state as a baseline assumption. From a field that is ever more concerned about the rise of inequality, but seems to forget that inequality isn't in the main about what resources you command or not, but about how the government treats you. From a field that relies on methods that shrink our view of political life to appreciations of whether voting is more or less likely controlling for such and such, rather than the keen political vocabularies emerging from communities that see police as a legalized gang. Over the decades, we have learned next to nothing about the political lives of highly policed communities from orthodox methods, in part because survey research rarely went into these communities or sampled in prisons and jails and halfway houses and pre-release centers, leading to underestimates of social disadvantage, as Becky Pettit has shown. And in part because asking someone whether they strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither agree, or disagree with this or that police practice does little to shed light on the actual lived experience of the state and government authority in these places. And in so doing, we have relegated people who the state has visited its most awesome use of state power to a class to which we do not listen. Today, I'm going to discuss discourses from the most extensive collection of first-hand accounts of the police by those who are policed to date. My argument is both substantive and methodological. Methodologically, I'm going to argue that a people's history offers the most complex accounting of American policing, but not just that. Subjugated knowledge offers a vital accounting of the American state and the democratic condition in our time. Understanding and theorizing government, state action, and state power requires examining its operation in real communities. By listening to how the broader community conceive of the democratic state's practices and its relation to citizens, not by focusing on what these institutions are meant to do and their formal representative structures, but what they actually do in communities and through the institutions that command the most authority in their lives, we can arrive at uncommon insights into the actual practice of democracy and citizenship as it is actually structured, and how communities in turn relate to the state and their political behavior and choose courses of action. Our aim is to represent democratic governance in our time through mapping citizens' experiences with, views of, and responses to the state, how they judge the responsiveness of authorities, and their experience-informed critiques of democracy and how they imagine freedom. As we will see, they inform us of alternative realities to formal law, governance, and bureaucratic relations based on extensive local understandings of the state and its practices. It shifts the boundaries of what we think of as democracy's main limits. Now, we are, of course, not the first to argue that subjugated knowledge is special knowledge and that it should form the basis of our analysis of democratic life. Foucault, bell hooks, Jim Scott, David Graeber's idea that, quote, within relations of domination, it is generally subordinates who are effectively relegated the work of understanding how the social relations in question really work. But this has not been a central mode of studying political life in my subfield. To arrive at strong descriptive inference, it is necessary to disrupt traditional research methods and seek out deliberation between key informants. When we employ a listening framework, we will see disagreement, reflection, comedy, longing, advice-giving, call and response, determination, high-level reasoning, and collective wisdom, and complex policy ideas. And third, civically, by introducing a public and social and civic infrastructure, we think we are addressing both democratic problems, surveillance being one of the only public things left, in the words of Bonnie Honig, and the absence of spaces to constellate and deliberate. Democracy is reduced, in her words, to polling, procedures, and policing. Portals creates connected political spaces out of disconnection. By introducing this public and civic infrastructure, we are not only studying democratic deliberation, we are facilitating it. Substantively, I'm going to argue that we misspecify the structure and experience of the American state, and we occlude how race-class subjugated communities experience government. Democracy is predicated on political equality, on the notion of an equal distance of government from citizens. The democratic ideal, as Robert Dahl enunciated, was for continued responsiveness of the government to the preferences of its citizens, considered as political equals. The state must give equal weight to citizens' views. Now, the way we study democratic life reflects this conception of the democratic ideal and constantly refers back to it. Let me show you what I mean. Most of the literature on our democracy is operating along one dimension: attention or inattention, because classically liberal arrangements are assumed. Questions of equal participation, a goal for half of a century, gave way to questions of equal influence. Policy is the prize, and inclusion in state operations is the goal. One of the biggest findings in this literature is that rising inequality has translated into a government skewed to the rich, that the preferences of the poor and middle class rarely get translated into policy outcomes, a decided step toward oligarchy. You can hardly round a corner in our discipline without coming across permutations on that argument. Now, scholars of American political development have been better at recognizing that the state is more than just whether it registers citizens' preferences or not. They tell us that the American state is submerged, weak, fragmented, private, delegated, most of all, weak. The state is generally beneficent, if aloof. Thus, the most pressing threat to democracy is that many citizens don't have their policy preferences registered in policy outcomes, the Bartels story, or that government does a bunch of good stuff, but citizens really don't get to see it, the Suzanne Mettler story. Or even that some groups in politics are more powerful than others, so they get what they want more of the time, the Jacob Hacker story. More connection to government is always better than less. Alienation comes from not being heard. Democratic inequality is the mere absence of equal responsiveness. This prominent storyline is mostly right if race-class subjugated communities are outside your field of vision. It may well describe what white Americans experience of government. But recognize that preference responsiveness questions about democracy's health were housed within a polity that was increasingly turning to, deepening its commitment to, and expanding its second face, by which I mean coercion, containment, surveillance, regulation, predation, and discipline. High levels of state control alongside formal political freedom, as Rousseau famously said, being born free, but everywhere in chains. The liberal democratic model, I argue in an article with Joe Sauce 2 years ago, is a highly salutary vision of the American state, and one that comes under great strain once we look to the bottom, to race-class subjugated communities where involvement with government is not the unalloyed good supposed by liberal framings. As we argued, if one's aim is to understand state powers to govern citizens, regulate their behaviors, revoke their freedoms, redefine their civic standing, and impose violence on them, we need to abandon our scholarly preoccupation with imagining government as a system that registers preferences and distributes uplifting material benefits, and augment analyses of the state's first face with its second face. Move beyond this basic reading of first face state activity as policy responsiveness to its actual treatment through its second phase, and two more quadrants come into view. In a condition of low first phase government attention, the state is not registering your preferences and neglectful of your material needs, and high second phase interventions, we get an institutional arrangement of distorted responsiveness. The state both withholds protection and aggressively intervenes. It constructs subjects, not principles. And in this condition, navigating the state requires extensive political knowledge and labor. Thus, discourses of access and representation and responsiveness, we need more votes, more representatives, more policy that is helpful to us. Greater provision is something we might very well see as key pivots in conversations in quadrants 1 and 2. But in quadrant 3, political responses turn inward, away from the state, and people demand not responsiveness to preferences, but recognition, to be known. And this will become clear as I go. By ignoring this dimension of state activity, we create and continually reinforce a lopsided scholarly imagination of American government and its deficits, and a lopsided methodological approach is both cause and consequence. Because the way we study democratic life fixates on Dalian first-phase conceptions, state action is reduced to only its representative institutions, because those are the ones that do or do not register the people's will. Dependent variables become those that are political acts of voting and calling one's representatives and specific behaviors narrowly defined as political, because those are the key instruments of democratic power in first-phase arrangements. In other words, deviations exist within a narrow boundary where the key reference point is the ideal itself. How much are your priorities reflected in policy outcomes becomes singular in importance. The second phase, a lot of recent work outside of political science has shown, is productive of race-class positions. I will show it also constructs political knowledge, political standing, and political responses. Today, I will illuminate this third quadrant. I'm going to discuss 4 ideational currents that emerged from the collective narratives that challenge first-phase liberal framings. They characterize their relationship to government as one marked by distorted responsiveness. Their main grievance is that they are not known by the state and they are misconstrued. They inhabit 2 distinct constitutions, the formal dictates on the book and the real rules that they needed to know to stay alive. And their political responses focus on what Michael Hanchard has called an ethics of aversion, a turn away from the state combined with a need to stick together and collective responsibility and autonomy. Now these, I would offer, are core frameworks. We've got 14,000 pages of transcripts. I can't tell you how much disagreement there is, how many different attitudes there are in these documents. But these are the kind of umbrella concepts, the guiding frameworks that operated above the various particular policy solutions that people offered. They espoused very different political attitudes and political outlooks, from assimilationist to community control, understandings of the source of crime, and they had even very different responses. They spanned the relatively well-off in our sample to those that were less so. But without pressing for too much of a central tendency or unifying concept or diminishing their complexity, these are 4 frameworks that we found really governed what was happening in the conversations. So let me explain how Portals works, because these are pretty much unlike anything, any kind of social science method to date. Gold shipping containers with immersive audio-visual technology are placed in areas with high foot traffic and community partners who see it as a benefit. Amar already had an extensive portal global network operating on every continent except Antarctica in 48 sites across 15 countries. 150,000 conversations were happening every year. They took place everywhere from Erbil, Iraq, to Herat, Afghanistan, to Berlin and Mumbai and Seoul. He had them in refugee camps outside a prison, in an IDP camp, at NGOs and in museums and universities. You can place them anywhere that has a link to power. When a person comes inside, they are connected by life-size. Can people see this? Do we need to dim the lights a bit? Yeah, that might be better. This is our portal in Mexico City. When a person comes inside, they're connected by life-size video to another person in a paired city in an identical gold shipping container that they don't know. We ask nothing else of them but to briefly tell us about themselves and their policing interactions. Then participants engage in a 20-minute conversation, about a 20-minute conversation, unscripted, with someone else in a paired city. Their conversation is not moderated by us, the researcher. Instead, Portal's participants are prompted to talk about policing, whatever that means to them. Here you see our curators, Devad and Louis Lee, talking to each other. And after they leave, they jot down their thoughts in the Gold Book, which you see excerpts from here. Each of the Portal's dialogues is video recorded and later transcribed and sometimes translated from Spanish. And I'll be drawing on a subset of those conversations today. A key player is the curator, who really brings the Portal to life in the local context and the local community. He or she holds events, works with other curators in the global network to have pop-up initiatives for the benefit of and designed by the community. The Portal is a space for art and performance. It's a space for chess tournaments, poetry slams. They're making a rap album out of 15 countries. They had a mobile barber shop. They had a vocational school at one point. They do yoga together. They do shared meals together. Really, whatever. They do town halls together. Portals are used as a gathering spot, so I'll just give you a few. I'm sorry this isn't coming up so clearly. A few examples of things that local curators and local communities use the portals for. Oh, that's very dark, but that's okay. They have global dialogues when they're not doing our research. This is in Baltimore. This was a town hall between police and the community, between Newark and Milwaukee. It did not go well. This is in Los Angeles. At one point, the Portal was vandalized, and so the community decided to do a communal mural on the outside of the Portal to represent, let me just show you what it looked like in the end, to represent what gentrification was bringing to Los Angeles. It's a place for student groups to connect with other student groups globally. And finally, it's just a place to hang out on hot summer days. Now we could probably bring the lights back up. Thank you. We placed the portals in 11 neighborhoods. So here I'll show you the 5 different cities. This isn't all the neighborhoods that we had. Milwaukee, Chicago in the center, Newark, we didn't place that police car there. On the far left, Lexington Market in Baltimore. We also had it in the Why Not lot next to Red Emma's. Mexico City, and this was our portal in Boyle Heights in Los Angeles. We located the portals broadly in communities experiencing pervasive policing interactions. Almost half of our participants had reported being stopped over 7 times by police in their lives, and many, almost half of black men reported being stopped in Milwaukee in the last week or month. Okay, so very, very high rates of police-citizen contact. But they also captured a broad swath of America. They stretch across very distinct policing regimes, from one reformist regime after high-profile scandals to one in the midst of federal oversight after it planted toy guns on citizens, and to Milwaukee, who most recently had tased the body of football player Sterling Brown. And we moved within cities, we moved the portal to different neighborhoods with very different local histories, police presence, and social relations. For example, a portal could be eliciting conversations between an upwardly mobile working class Latino student population at CSU Dominguez Hills, founded after the Watts riot, to the Amani neighborhood in Milwaukee, the most impoverished and distressed in that city. The 53206 zip code which contains Amani has the highest share of incarcerated black men in America. By age 30 to 34, only 38% of them have not spent time in a correctional facility. But another portal sat in an equally impoverished site that's activated. The most recent portal was in the Let Us Breathe collective portal site in Chicago, founded after unrest around the infamous Homan Square black site, where police were literally disappearing citizens. Around a single portal, there's also dynamism and variation. A portal will draw in second-generation immigrants, former gang members, budding activists, college students, working-class people on their way to work, sex workers. A site may be near a bus stop, an open-air drug market, a housing project or halfway house, a homeless encampment, and a workers' co-op. It might draw in police officers as well as ex-inmates on ankle monitors. The Los Angeles Library, that has a highly educated people coming into it, as well as the nearby Skid Row population of 34,000 unhoused people. Also in LA, the Mercado La Paloma site draws in USC's IT department, families trying their hand at the food business, as well as ex-inmates because of the nearby halfway house. And the dyadic nature of the portals also invites another source of variation, that of participant pairings themselves, which span generations, race and class positions, and gender. Conversations between Chicago and Los Angeles, for example, could be between two young Latinas, between a working class black man and a retiree, or a number of other combinations. Portals also captures not just differences in city spaces, but in the same neighborhood over time. So we capture narratives around policing and mobilization before, during, and after police fatally killed Sylvelle Smith in Milwaukee, and the unrest that comes in the Sherwin Park neighborhood. We have the portal before, during, and after the Baltimore Gun Trace Task Force case. So we're able to trace dialogues across time as well. So the Portals Project encompasses different contexts, different people within these contexts, and even different moments and markers within those contexts. So just for an example, a Milwaukee man enters the portal chamber in Milwaukee. He may be connected to one of 5 sites or one of 5 cities. Even within a city, he might be connected to the site that we had near a local community thrift store or the Let Us Breathe site. He could connect to a site in the South Side similar to his own neighborhood, or a neighborhood quite unlike his own near Little Village. Depending on when he entered the portal, he may be talking to someone before, in the midst of, or after his own neighborhood experienced the police killing of Smith. Who he is connected to also varies. And participants may have similar levels of police experience or divergent. They may hold very similar or opposed views about police, crime, and collective strategies. Okay. I'm going to skip very quickly through this, but if you're interested in thinking about how the portals method is different from focus groups or ethnography or communication strategies, or typical interviewing or case study, I'd be happy to talk about that. But several aspects, and this is on our website, we think disinhibit the audience and really enable deliberation. And I'm going to fly through these very quickly because I want to get to the material, just to give you a sense of who came in. And of course, this is not a random sample, and I can expose my frustration to that question in Q&A. It's a purposive sample, but you'll see we mainly had a very young population coming into the portal. This varies a little bit by city. Let me give you a sense of how often people reported being stopped by police. This bimodal distribution will make sense to you in a slide or two. you'll see that there's quite a lot of variation on how much people reported trusting police. And remember, because these are dyadic, you can get somebody in the box who says that they always trust police, conversing with somebody who says they never trust police. And we have quite a few conversations where people disagree. And it's really interesting to watch how people navigate that and how people find their way towards a place of building. And this one's, will show you Milwaukee will stand out immediately. The share of people who had some police contact in the last week or month is quite high. But there's variation across the cities. This one really stopped me in my tracks when I saw it. And we have since done a little bit of investigation with other random and representative survey samples that show basically this same pattern. Among those who have been stopped by police, the majority had their first encounter before the tender age of 14. The majority. And we see this in the dialogues as well. One of the first things that comes out, normally a conversation begins at that very moment, where somebody will recount what their kind of baptism moment was with police. I've been having problems with them since I was 12. I will remember this day because it was my first police interaction. They ran past us and the police just came up and just grabbed up me and my cousin. We're not with them, we don't even know them. And I remember this officer, and she names him. He a real big dude, like I was scared as shit. I was 12 years old. I thought I was gonna die. The first time police stopped me, this is in Baltimore, I was 11 years old, and they stopped me because I was playing water balloon fights with my friends during the summer. And they handcuffed all of us. They paraded us in front of the community. They had the helicopter on us, and this was like a group of 11-year-olds. Like nobody was older than 13. And like they had guns on us. They pointed a gun to my head and they threatened our lives. He goes on to talk about how in the eyes of his community he was never the same. That group was regarded as criminals. At a young age, like 12 years old, I experienced the police. They come into my house, they're looking for one person, but they still feel the need to put a gun to the head of a 12-year-old. And I'm like, that's my first time seeing a gun. And it's like, wow, this is what I'm exposed to. Like just predetermined by who knows what, but not me being a young person. Because I just hit 19, and I just finished high school, and I'm trying my best to be a positive influence on my community and really do something big. When I was about 14 and 13, I always been a full-figured girl. The police would stop me when I was walking outside with my friends at night. Are you a prostitute? Ask me questions like that. I'm a 13-year-old girl at the time. 8 years old was my first time getting pulled over. Nigga, for you know what I'm saying, like walking with a group of other little niggas. We was out in the hood, like playing around with sticks, and we was all wearing the same colors and shit, and you know what I'm saying, just to match each other because we was all friends type shit. But what they put that on? We gang banging. They just called us vice lords. We wasn't doing that shit. And he recounts being locked up when he was 8 years old. I was in second grade, and after that, bro, I was like 10, 11, 12, 13. Each one of those years, the police called me. They used to pick me up and drop me off on the other side of the tracks. Just to show you this briefly, remember that the rates of encounters and the bimodal distribution. This also was very surprising to me. Maybe it shouldn't have been. These are people, men and women, in the very same communities. And you see that they're mirror images of each other. So the men, over half, have report over seven encounters. And among the women, there's still a pretty large share that don't have any police contact. And this comes out in interesting ways. We have coded up anytime somebody talks about gender, anytime somebody talks about being a man or being a woman and what it's like to have police contact. And the women often say things like, well, we have to protect the men. You know, if a man comes up and says, hey, you know, walk with me for a second, the police are over there, we'll do that for them. And oftentimes the men recount, like, yeah, if you're a woman, you'll be able to move through the city, but for us, we really need to watch how we move. We can come back to this. It's just to give you a sense of there really was variation in who you're paired with is quite random, right? We don't know who is going to enter on this side and who's going to enter on this side. And oftentimes we have people who repeat the experience. So you will see their discourse with somebody who has an experience like them and somebody who has a very different experience. This is just to show you that, this is conversational dyads where both participants have a high rate of police contact. We coded up the transcripts using deduce, which allows us to qualitatively code each conversation and to pair the survey data to the conversation level coding. So I can tell you precisely what themes animate the conversations when a pair of middle-aged mothers converse, or what discursive patterns appear when people at different levels of police contact are in the box, or what is revealed in disagreement, or how one type of response links to another. But today I'm not going to do that. What we are not doing, we could use the portals to discover policing tactics, to be sure. We learn, for example, that the police in Milwaukee like to throw up the hood of their cars to cover the dash cam, or that gun burying is pretty prevalent among Chicago participants. But we approach the data not to test a specific hypothesis, but to locate what Kathy Cohen and others have called an oppositional ideology, the frameworks that marginal groups use to interpret their political world and to assess their positioning and to craft political responses. Our project is to identify a coherent lens through which race-class subjugated communities interpret their political world, and to discover how they structure ideas of power, how they theorize democracy, how they attach subjective meaning to the same events. So instead of asking people whether they think police are fair or whether they trust the police all the time, sometimes, or never, what a survey might ask, instead we ask, how do they define the limits of the permissible of police and government and residents? Instead of asking, does having a police encounter cause a particular attitude to develop or a particular behavior, as those analyzing surveys might do with some difficulty, we instead listen to hear their causal story of the state in their communities. And instead of trying to measure mere mentions of topics or distributions of anti-police attitudes, we seek to explore how people are reasoning through their experiences, the ways they frame and don't frame problems with security from violence. And by doing all of this, we can locate the various strands of political discourse and beliefs structured by personal and communal experience with the state. We're also following Kathy Kramer's political ethnography and kind of active listening investigations. And I just love this quote. Okay, let me move on. It scarcely needs saying that portals participants describe encounters that lead to violence and state humiliation and disrespect. But in our explorations, it was striking to us how often democratic inclusion, more votes, more representation, more voice, was neither lexically present nor an overarching framework. They did not invoke democratic concepts or recourse to the idea that the state was meant to reflect their community. Instead, the thrust of their complaint is misrecognition by the state. This was paramount. State authorities are intimately involved in my life, but don't know me, and the character of their knowledge about me is misaligned with who I am and who my community is. The state is blind to my struggles. We are visible but anonymous, hypervisible even. I'm not seen in my full truth, even while I'm exceptionally visible. Aspects of myself are negated or flattened by how the state interacts with me, and my identity as a potential suspect is fixed, and I'm approached with a predefined script. Specifically, the state is incapable of seeing me as a victim, father, human, citizen worthy of respect. Parents discussed how kids had no wiggle room to find out what type of person they are. And so kid-related acts, like the water balloon fights and the wearing the colors, become suspicious. My inwardly generated idea of myself conflicts with how the state externally imposes its image of me, and I have no power to define myself. I don't have different tastes or desires or opinions. Now, state intimacy here does not generate connection or knowing. This is what political science assumes. The more the state knows your preferences and heeds them means higher quality democracy. But here, more fundamental than preferences is to be seen. In the conversation, this recognition premise operated at two levels, as both a political desire, a necessary condition on the way to being regarded, I need to be known in a more fulsome way, not reduced, and what the nature of the violation was. If I'm unknown, what is the state's capacity for intervening in reasonable ways in my life? It operated across multiple venues. The media parades us losing, and that's not who we are. And it constructed their response, which we'll see. In contrast to the state's inability to see me as a distinct citizen, Portal's conversations show that they had to make very fine-grained distinctions of police. What does it mean to be recognized? The state authorities need to chop it up with us, have a presumption of my value, not my suspiciousness. Now, this may remind you of political theorist Charles Taylor's seminal work on recognition. But for Taylor, recognition is important because it forges identity. Liberal states are at risk of homogenizing difference through universalizing principles. To be difference blind is to not give distinct cultures equal status and presumption of worth. We mean something else. This is not the purpose of recognition for Portals. I'm misrecognized by how the state deals with my person and community, not a passive recognition of my cultural identity. Let me show you a few examples. One person says, but you got to think about it, man. These police officers come in from suburb areas where they rarely see black people, and then they're not only seeing black people, they're seeing the stereotyped black person, in the hood, street niggas, they seeing the gutter. First of all, they fucking terrified. They terrified, really. They can put that badge on, put that suit on. They got to have a face to where they got to make it seem like they're not, but in reality, I know they is terrified. I'm terrified sometimes walking through these damn neighborhoods. So these damn police officers come in from all other type of places and pulling up, telling us what to do, how to do it, and where. Because a lot of people, and he goes on, and notice the transition here, because a lot of people get the wrong idea about police. Like you said, there is good police officers out here, as well as teachers. I don't feel like a person who don't come from this area, who don't come from especially the ghetto, I don't think they should be policing and teaching, because they don't understand us. There's things about us they don't understand, and they could never understand because they haven't been through what we've been through. They haven't seen what we've seen. Most black people, they uncles and cousins and best friends is drug dealers. The killer, you know that my uncle is a drug dealer. It's like, damn near ain't no way I can't see this shit. They don't understand that. They think, okay, it's a choice. You had a choice to do this. You had a choice to do that. They think it comes down to simple shit when you know it's more complex than they really know. And instead of busting everybody down ASAP, I think they should get to know the niggas that's always on the block. I think they should get out their cars, smoke a square, chop it up, talk to everybody. Get to know people, you in this neighborhood. Notice in the conversation, he's capable of making fine-grained distinctions about individual officers. There's good officers, but the institution as a whole doesn't know them, doesn't distinguish their choices, doesn't understand their person. He's clear to say that there's good cops, but he quickly says that they can't police well because they don't understand us. Two other examples. You do have those individuals who look at us and look at the news and say they're animals. Look at them. Look how they behave. They're obscene individuals. They don't know me. I've went to school. I have my degree, and I cherish my job. I love working with children. I love working in the community. I think at the end of the day, I'm still going to be that 1/3 of a human being because of what society and what the history has written on. As far as the police that might have grown up in our communities that know us and our struggles, not to use that as a downfall, the police that is stopping our kids and messing with us are the ones that do not even know us. These are white people coming in and just saying all black men or all black people are drug addicts. And it's not like that. It's a lot of young working people, Do you understand what I'm saying? One of the most common narrative anchors in the conversations is what we call distorted responsiveness. Instead of responsive government agents, people experience state agents as both everywhere and nowhere. Police authority was most energetic where it didn't matter for their lives, busting people for selling loose squares or other minor transgressions, but withholding and out of reach and aloof when they were steady dying. Aggressive policing and patrolling was yoked with ambivalence. This meant that participants saw the police as both useless and harmful, and they saw themselves as vulnerable to the state on both flanks. To abandonment, they give you time to die, one said, and aggressive intervention. Not being heard, not being cared for when you are a victim, not being taken seriously is a form of non-responsiveness and disregard by the state. It is painful in its own right. But being treated harshly in the company of perceived abandonment is what we mean by distorted responsiveness. These framings of the police often occurred in the same breath, two sides to the same coin. A few examples will show what I mean. Now, when that being said, when they don't have nothing else to do, they'll go to certain neighborhoods and just pick at you. You know what I'm saying? Now, when you really are needed in that neighborhood, they might have never come. But if you go like places anywhere in the western part of LA, something happened there, they immediately are there. And the reason for that is because those neighborhoods is very rich, you know what I'm saying? And it caters to the rich. A poor man wouldn't have a chance concerning the law in LA. The police where I live at, they just take a long time to get there. Like, you can call them for anything. It don't matter what it is. And they be talking like they don't got enough force out here to come and help you when you really need them. But they be harassing people who ain't got nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yeah, they do shit when they ready to do it, when it's beneficial to them. They really don't give a fuck about how you is. In my city, it's more of they will put you in jail for weed or something little, but if somebody gets shot in the head down the street, they can't find who did it. That's how it is here. I really don't like the police. Like, they don't respond fast enough when you really need them. They rude as ever. They stop you for no apparent reason at all. Like, I feel like they do too much. Your mission is to serve and protect, but we see you as threats now. Me and my son, we scared to walk down the street. We go home, we shut all the doors, let all the blinds down, we go to bed. And this man compares his experience to an abusive father. Anything happen to you, son? I'm here. But instead, your father is the one that's abusing you and beating you. Why is you protecting me? You the one harming me. It's the same way with the police and the higher authority here. And we go through this every day. I just got pulled over by the police, not even 3 to 4 days ago. Man, I got a good driving license. I'm a high school graduate. I'm not a felon, you know what I'm saying? I don't smoke, but you still want to search my car and harass me like I murdered someone.
So I just wanted to let you know we're closing in on 5, and I imagine there are a lot of
Oh,
questions
good.
brimming.
Okay. With this in view, it seems awkward to theorize unequal democracy as just about one's preferences or not being heard by officials or political exclusion, as my political science colleagues would have it. But the dual position of not being heard and crushed on a lark. I'll skip pretty quickly since I'm running out of time. Another thing that we have a piece coming out in the Journal of Politics called Too Much Knowledge, Too Little Power, where we noticed something in the dialogues. We noticed that participants had extensive political knowledge about government. But this knowledge of government was dual and contrasting. They knew what the state was supposed to do, and then they described what it actually did. So let me just skip over my notes and show you what I mean. And I'll just start with this, famous quote by a father of our field, Philip Converse, or father of public opinion and political behavior. Popular levels of information about public affairs are, from the point of view of the informed observer, astonishingly low. Well, what we found is that Portal's participants had extensive knowledge of how municipal government worked. They would mention things in the course of conversation like the Hicks waiver. They knew about due process. They knew more than those of us who have studied policing for the better part of 2 decades about how policing actually worked. And from this knowledge, they had elaborated a code of informal prohibitions, things that they could do, things that they should do, precautions they should take, workarounds, different accepted behaviors that they should engage in. So we can't be 3 or more. This comes up a lot, right? Being in a crowd was forbidden or would elicit police attention. There may not be a written policy on that, but that's what they do. Those kinds of statements happened a lot in the course of the conversation, right? Saying, this is what we know from our body of laws and from our Constitution. This is what the media tells us. This is the oath that police have sworn and is emblazoned on the side of every police car, but let me tell you how it actually works. So to give you a sense of these, let's see. Let's read the second one. But it's unconstitutional, but it ain't for us no way. You know what I'm saying? These laws, they meant to fuck us over. Yeah, we under the Willie Lynch law. You know what I'm saying? Then this one, he's describing to his conversation partner in Mexico City how the law works in the U.S. Well, I think that most real people will understand that the United States Constitution protects the people from the government. It says what the government cannot do to you, okay? And what you can expect from the government to leave you alone and not do certain things to you. They can't take your land away from you. They can't come into your house, your home. They can't do certain things. But when you tell the police that, I have a right not to answer because the Constitution says so, they don't care. That doesn't matter to them. They need that information, and if you don't give it to them, they are going to make your life miserable. Oftentimes, you see phrases like, they're supposed to protect and serve, but really they do this. We're supposed to be innocent before we're proven guilty, but really we're guilty before we're innocent. A kind of counterposing of what Tracy Mears, my co-author, calls the overt curriculum and the hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum is what they actually lived by. And it meant incredible interpretive labor to navigate their lives. But if you didn't understand the hidden curriculum, it could result in harmful action by the state. I'm known for my work suggesting that custodial interactions, carceral interactions with the state, demobilize people. They lead people to forgo the political process and to involuntarily or voluntarily politically withdraw. But we noticed something interesting here. It's not just that people were receding from the state. It's not just that they were saying things like, well, I'm going to stay to myself. Right now, what I'm doing out here in the streets of Chicago is staying to myself, minding my own business, and doing what I got to do to survive. I avoid them. I stay in my house every day. They also started to say things like, well, we can police our own. We need to stick together. We need to come together as a community and police our own. A kind of expression of collective autonomy and collective power. Often this was just an aspiration. It wasn't necessarily well worked out in their view. But that I began to revise my old intuition that it was just state retreat happening. There is a politics there, and it's one of communal autonomy. Okay, let me linger on that so you can at least see it. And let me begin to conclude. I want to remind you of this image and of the second face of the state. Even though I've spent my time here with you today emphasizing modes of state action from the bottom-up perspective, distorted responsiveness, custodial socialization that flows from it, and the hidden curriculum, these potent new storylines borrow from the past. The country that is black has been theorizing the American state in their sermons, memoirs, reporting, and poetry. But those who grew up on T.H. Marshall and Robert Dahl saw everywhere pluralism and political equality. They seemed to discover threats to democracy that were the state of play in race-class subjugated communities. Those of us who grew up on Du Bois and Baldwin and Malcolm X knew better. Black intellectual traditions have been contesting and reframing this view of America for at least a century. I hope in this project to unsettle framings of American democracy and inequality and to show from portals that we have a distorted portrait of democracy and government in America. As we describe in the book we're writing, Portals tells a new but obvious story about race-class citizenship in America and recasts how we understand the role of the state in their lives. It's not exclusion from democratic institutions that characterizes political inequality in our time, but inclusion in the anti-democratic face of the state. Marginalization or unequal citizenship is not simply a story of material inequality, the distance between the haves and the have-nots, or the responsiveness of our political system to the haves. Instead, it is a broad difference in the way the government, from schools to the welfare office to especially the police, orients itself towards residents. It's not only that people in communities like the low end are exposed to a different set of material deficits concentrated in particular spaces that make them vulnerable. People in these locales experience distorted responsiveness from the state's most present authority. They illustrate the disconnect between what is claimed in democratic theories of American politics and what is actually realized. What Portals participants know is their experience of government bears little resemblance to official governance or written law. And so when they say the laws aren't for us, or that may be your reality, but it's not ours, they are not mounting a challenge that our preferences aren't registered. They are demanding a revision of the state as operating in anti-democratic ways as a matter of unofficial policy in their neighborhoods. When they say we have the law but police don't follow it no way, they mean to document that sworn oaths mean little to communities when the facts of experience show police subverting that oath. I also wanted to upend the traditional way of gathering research data and argue that we can do more than mere spectatorship. Our methods can, through connection, bring to life communities and bring to life civic possibilities and new types of civic encounters in these communities. And I'll just say that this is where we're going next. We have put in several grant applications to expand the portals to communities like Amani around the world. And our hope is to create what we're calling a global undercommons democracy, a place where people can, through sharing local wisdom, achieve global connection and build power together. One example I like to highlight in my talks is what happened in Milwaukee after several months of the portal being there. We thought this was a terrific medium for listening and for really revising what we thought we knew. But instead, it became clear to us that this was a platform to build power across places. And in Milwaukee, people began to say, our portal. Kids without passports were traveling to distant countries every day. They ended up using the portal to negotiate a gang truce that remains to this day. The aldermen started passing through a neighborhood they had never come to before. They began using the portal for all kinds of little enactments that we thought would chip away at civic ostracism and unsettle their disadvantage. I can talk more about what Lewis Lee did in his community with the portal in the Q&A, but we began to realize that the power of this went beyond research and towards building civic capacity and power in these communities. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
So we have about 15 minutes for your questions. We have microphones that will come down. Yes.
Professor Weaver, thank you for your talk. It was great. I have a question. Well, two questions related to the police, to the cops. said along two veins. So the first is, how are the police constructing these communities, right? And so, you made these connections, but the way that police see the people in these places, is this the same as what Malcolm was writing about in the 50s and 60s? Is it the same as what Du Bois was writing about in 1890 through the 70s, or has it changed in any significant way? And similarly with the cops, we tend to talk about the state as this one thing, but in this federalist kind of shit show of a government that we have, there's beefs between levels, right? And so as the current presidential administration has tried to turn every law enforcement agency into a member of ICE, we've seen glimmers of solidarity with police departments declaring that they refuse to do that. Anecdotally, I can tell you the police chief of my community brought us all in and sat us down and said, we work for you guys, not for them. And so is this boundary policing, or is this real solidarity between these local law enforcement agencies and their communities, or is it them simply kind of going on some old school, like, this is not our job, we're not going to have you tell us what to do kind of stuff?
I love your first question about how police construct these communities across time, because one of the things I am struggling with right now that I am trying to do, I don't know if I will be able to do it, is to locate an arc across historical Black discourse around the police. So if you listen to James Baldwin, he is theorizing democracy and oftentimes speaks about police. If you pick up Black historical newspapers, they are theorizing the police as being central to what the state is doing. Now, it was, of course, different. Police were, in some ways, more brutal, more unregulated, and smaller, much smaller, much smaller. They had much less power in American communities, much less everyday interactions with those communities in the 40s, 50s, and before the kind of rise of the tripling of police manpower in the 70s and the rise of broken windows policing that really orients urban governments towards protecting people from the market because they couldn't, or protecting people from crime because they couldn't protect them from the market, and really centralizing the role of police in constructing subjects and in managing disorder created by, in many ways, the state itself. And so one of the things that I've noticed, I went back to an oral history archive called Behind the Veil, where they interviewed thousands of Black Americans about their experience, people who had lived through Jim Crow in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and interviewed them. And I was just sort of curious, how prevalent did we see the same kind of narratives? And you wouldn't believe how often people discussed police action in their communities. Now, sometimes it was different. Oftentimes it was them celebrating the integration of the local police force. But oftentimes it looked very similar to the kinds of things we were hearing in these conversations today. Similarly, if you go back, and nobody has done this, Kerner Commission interviewed in 1967, sent field teams to 23 cities and interviewed 1,200 residents, many of them political leaders, but some of them ordinary citizens. And what they say about the police is remarkably similar. I mean, you could put it up to the Portals dialogues, and it's as though no time has passed. So part of one thing we want to do in the book is to connect that narrative arc and find continuities and discontinuities. Part of what we think we are doing is representing, much like the WPA narratives went and collected the narratives of ex-slaves, or the Freedmen's Bureau went and collected the narratives of newly freed people. We wanted to collect the narratives of people living through a profound moment of social control. So we will be doing that in the book, trying to kind of trace those historical arcs, and not just through elites and through the thought leaders like James Baldwin, but through ordinary voices. I'm not sure I understood your second question about the state as one thing. So do you mean to say that I've kind of flattened police across these communities kind of operate in similar ways?
Yeah, kind of, but also in different agencies too, right? So like, what does it mean to interact with your local law enforcement versus a statey versus an FBI person or ICE in particular?
I would say the preponderance of the narratives focuses on local police interactions because those are the ones that are most prevalent. We do have many Latino communities in Los Angeles and in Chicago talking about ICE and immigration and equating it to similar police actions and a similar sense of being suspicious and being out of place and having to navigate certain workarounds and precautions. We haven't analyzed them, and you've given me a good idea to kind of really try to parse out what are people saying about, are there differences? And I do think there are, even in the local police forces. So you get certain kinds of topics that come up again and again and again in Baltimore, around Baltimore police, that you don't get in Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, it is a classically white police force that drives in from the suburbs. There's very little diversity on the force, and an entirely black population that's being policed. And so the racial discourses there look very different than the racial discourses in Baltimore, where a substantial share of the police are black and are seen as enemies of the community, even still. So I need to do more to kind of look at the city distinctions. I think we were starting by just finding the big frameworks, but I think there's a lot of differences and divergences to explore.
Ashu, you want to take the next question?
This is such an impressive project that even a mild criticism might sound like an act of intellectual incivility.
Please.
That said, at least 3 points that might be worth considering. One, a political theory viewpoint. Your critique of Dahl, I think, is unfair.
Okay.
The concept of polyarchy, as laid out right after the mid-60s revolution, political revolution, civil rights revolution in the United States, said that before the mid-1960s, America was less of a polyarchy, became more of a polyarchy later, because on the x-axis, competitiveness, it's been competitive for quite some time, and you can get fairly competitive polities, even if one community is excluded by definition. But on participation, there's a huge difference on y-axis. And if you take this further, he would argue, looking at this material, and certainly based on his New Haven book, he would probably argue that inclusion of these excluded race class subjugated communities, lovely phrase, very, very evocative, race class subjugated communities would make America a bigger polyarchy, greater polyarchy, right? So I think the concept there, or the idea there, allows this kind of, on participation certainly, it allows incorporation of what you're saying in democratic theory. And certainly he's the paradigm of liberal democratic theory, so I think the criticism is a bit unfair if my interpretation of what is right. Second, as I'll present tomorrow, one problem in looking at the subjugated communities in the United States is the numbers are very small. When you get into a place like India, and let me just give you the numbers here, which we didn't hear from you, which we didn't get from you. If you think of the lower castes of India, the lower Hindu castes of India, that adds up to 68% of India. And democracy begins to respond to that, not perfectly, but it just cannot ignore 68%. Right? It can ignore 12% of America that is black. And maybe some more that you can add to that, but it can't ignore 68%. So the way the democracy responding to it won't be race class subjugated. We'll have to just call it subaltern. Right? The subaltern community, it's a very different kind of response. It's not perfect. It's not that their interests have been taken care of fully, but there is, the way democracy is going out towards the subaltern is a very different phenomenon because of sheer numbers. That must matter in a voting public. And third,
And
I
let's
wonder.
make it brief
Yeah,
too.
third is just a question. Do you find the Maya Sen argument about deep roots, about the way American South was between 1865 and 1880s, and the way it has been over the last 20 years, the continuity is there. Do you find that argument persuasive, appealing? Whatever.
Those are really good questions. I think my critique is actually not of Dahl and not of polyarchy. My critique is what the subfield of American politics has taken that to mean and how it has trained their gaze almost exclusively on a theory of democratic deficit as housed only within responsiveness or not, representative or not. Whereas when you go to communities, to subaltern communities, that is not how they evaluate the state. They're evaluating it not based on first face arrangements, or not in the main on first face arrangements. They're evaluating it on how it coerces them, how it regulates their behaviors, whether it can kick in their door in the middle of the night. Much more powerful and present and non-abstracted notions. And we as a subfield have utterly failed to look at that conception of government because I think we don't live in those neighborhoods. We don't understand government to be, in the main, whether your body is safe from sexual power, in the words of Paul Butler, who compares a police pat-down to sexual power, to a sexual assault. To me, that's where my critique lies. I'm not in the weeds of the theory of polyarchy. We're missing an entire axis of how the state actually comports itself, actually acts, actually exhibits power. So that's my critique. I mean, I don't, yeah. And then the second, I mean, I don't know, I'll have to think about your numbers are small idea. The numbers are not small if you consider urban democracy, right? And if you consider the population that is in the city limits of most of these places. And then on the third, just quickly, on Maya Sen's Deep Roots, I blurbed the book, I reviewed the book. I think there's something powerful in the continuity that she's tracing. For those who are unfamiliar with the book, basically they have found that the counties that had the largest share of their population enslaved in 1860 today exhibit certain patterns, racial resentment patterns. I think they look at lynching at some point in the book. I have wished that they did more to elucidate the mechanisms. So is this an institutional transference story? Is this, at some points in the book, it seems to be a kind of generational pass-down story. So they find that, this share in counties that had the largest share enslaved in 1860 vote certain ways today, are basically more racially hostile, more racially anti-democratic today. I think it's a persuasive argument. I would be curious to see what historians think of it. The use of persistence regressions kind of came into fashion and then left the field of economics. I'd be curious to see what people think of that. Curious to hear what you think of it.
Let's take one more question. Actually, we'll do blessing.
Presentation. I mean, as I was listening, I mean, there are so many. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So many concepts were ringing in my mind, but the one that really struck me is the misrecognition, not being known by the state. And as you were talking, I was thinking about Nairobi, where we work, and most African cities. It's always the case of two cities. Okay, the real city and what is called the informal settlements, which actually is the majority. So it's not about numbers. Okay, and what we see is the near absence of the public sector, the near absence of government and government investments. And when you begin to talk about the police, what we see is that these are places that the police doesn't cover. The highbrow areas have police stations, if you look at Nairobi, for instance, but 60% of the population in the city, and you mentioned urban politics, doesn't really have police investment in policing infrastructure. Okay, so the reason is that they are informal settlements, but yet they are political constituencies. So in effect, one of the things I was just looking at, a comparison. How does this play out? It doesn't play out in most of the ways you showed it, but it should play out in absence. And I can give an example. Youth are seen as perpetrators of violence, but nobody have really looked at youth as victims. And that is where data comes in, and that is where research is important. Because we looked at causes of adult death. Okay, I mean, they are dead, and something caused their death. In 2003, injury caused 5% of adult death. But by 2012, because we have a demographic surveillance, so we looked at every year, by 2012, injury has risen to 12%. And 54% of those injury deaths are related to assault. And when you go to younger people, it actually goes up to 70%. Of course, they didn't kill themselves. Assaults has to do with you being a victim. But there is totally no police presence in these areas. And so if you talk to the community, they said, well, we don't matter. We are not part of the city. So, and I think that's what I wanted to throw up. This fact that it's not about the way police relate to the community, it's just that they are totally absent. Government is not there. Okay, whether it is rape, whether it is assault of all kinds, whether it is gang violence, there is totally absence. But data shows how big this challenge really is. And for us, again, it's no more about these issues, it is how do you address it, which is where engaging with government. And in your case, I wanted to get your reaction about engaging with the police in terms of these issues, and how do you move forward from there?
What you characterize is also, with a number of caveats, how Black communities experienced police inaction in prior eras. So before the rise of modern policing, Black areas were underprotected. Randall Kennedy made the concept of under-policing alive, and showed that oftentimes when victims called in these areas, they got slower response times, halting responses. That, I think, is still a strand, as you saw in some of these discourses, where people say they're everywhere, and yet when when sister is lying on the floor, bleeding out from a gun wound, somehow they take 2 hours to come, and when they come, then they're asking, does anybody have a warrant out, right? Their orientation to us is skewed. In terms of, I didn't report this, but youth are, in this sample, have extraordinary rates of victimization. So we asked them not just about police contact, but also about being a victim. And they're the same population, okay? The same population. This idea that, there's the perpetrators and the victims is just a total, utter fallacy. But in the course of, and maybe we will map this out, in the course of the dialogues, even I was struck at how young people have already witnessed extraordinary traumas, have lost fathers. Our curator, Lewis Lee, has lost 3 brothers to gang violence, has gunshot wounds himself. The extraordinary levels of violence that are witnessed by very young people. I think we need to start to think of this as a childhood intervention. Policing and victimization are childhood interventions. And if we can make the interventions a last resort in childhood, or create a new set, advance a new set of relations among youth, rather than learning about the government at age 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 as being a surveillance force, you have a different interaction. I think until we get there, our policy responses are completely unimaginative, right? Better training has not yielded, historically, right? Procedural reforms have never and will not yield more substantive justice. We know that from the historical record. In fact, it is in a time of progressive, expansive police reforms and procedural justice reforms that we got the biggest expansion in police power. I think we need a broader reorientation of how how governing authorities approach and deal with youth. And part of why I like to throw up that slide about their ages is that I don't think that most Americans understand that this is happening, the onset of custodial interactions are happening in the prepubescent years. What can we do to reimagine the role of the state among youth, even youthful offenders? And that shifted over time. So I have an article that came out in the Russell Sage Journal where, imagine a 2x2. Yes, I've been an offender. Yes, I did something to run afoul of the law, or no, I haven't on one axis. Yes, I've had contact with the criminal justice system. I've been arrested, or no, I haven't on the other axis, right? The criminal justice system should have the majority of Americans in the diagonal. Yes, I've had contact. Yes, I offended. No, I haven't had contact. No, I haven't done a crime. And that's exactly how it looked in the among the cohort of youth that was turning 18 in 1979. By 2001, the quadrants had shifted, and the majority of Americans fell in the off diagonal. It's shocking. Yes, I've done a crime. No, I have not had contact. No, I haven't done a crime. Yes, I have been arrested. And I will leave it up to you to guess which racial demographics moved where. To me, we have to grapple with that. That means that a substantial share of Americans are having contact who have not engaged in offending behavior. Now, some would say to me, well, that's because they're trying to, it's the old Bill Stuntz argument, they're trying to go after the real violent guys. And so we had to expand police surveillance of everyone. And yes, some people got caught up. But we're at a point where the exceptions are mocking the rule.
And now let's continue our conversation out in the foyer over reception. Please join me in thanking Professor Vesla Weaver.
Thank you.